Welcome to all joining this webinar today. I know everyone has a lot on their mind right now, but I hope this next hour is a really good way for everyone to escape and just take a break from everything. So just for some background, this webinar is put on by the Pathways in Business and Environment program at CBAY. So this series brings in sustainability-oriented professionals to discuss the work they do and the journeys that they have taken in their careers. So by sharing their stories, speakers can provide a set of possible roadmaps for students to follow. From the outside, roles at the intersection of business and the environment can be difficult to navigate. So hopefully this series aims to give students an idea of the array of opportunities that exist, from big picture strategy to day-to-day details. So for about the first 30 to 40 minutes, Paul's gonna talk, go through his sort of career path and the founding of his company. And at the end, we're gonna have a Q&A session. So if everyone can just put their questions into the Q&A, we'll get to those at the end. So today I'm delighted to introduce Paul Rice, the founder and CEO of Fair Trade USA, to discuss his career path in the founding and managing of the internationally acclaimed social enterprise and leading certifier of fair trade products in North America. Paul believed deeply that the fair trade movement would have a major impact on the world. And 20 years later, fair trade has grown into a widely known and increasingly mainstream consumer trend that is rapidly approaching an inflection point. In 2016, consumer recognition of fair trade certified label reached 67%, and US retail sales of fair trade products have grown to an estimated 6 billion. Paul holds a degree in economics and political science from Yale and an MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. He's spoken at the World Economic Forum, Clinton Global Initiative, TEDx, and numerous universities and conferences around the world. And we're delighted that he could come here today and talk with us. So take it away, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, y'all. And really excited to share a little bit about my journey and about my cause. Honestly, on a day when it feels like the political process is so discouraging and so broken, I feel in some ways even more validated in the path that I took, which is around consumer power. And each and every one of us being able to vote for a better world every day with our dollars. Every time we shop, we can vote with our dollars for a better world. And not that that replaces public policy, because it doesn't. We need decent government, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about this morning is how you and I and everyday people can make a difference in small but meaningful ways. So I don't know if you saw my bio, born and raised in Texas, went to Yale for undergrad, got radicalized while I was an undergrad. I decided that I wanted to work with farmers, wanted to work on poverty and food security and sustainable development and access to land. Nicaragua, this was '82. Nicaragua was just beginning a revolution. They were taking land from the rich and giving it to the poor. I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to go be a part of it. So I bought a one-way ticket to Nicaragua in the summer of '83. Thought I would stay for a year or two, work with farmers, see how I could help. And I fell in love with it. Changed my life. I stayed for 11 years. I was 22 when I went away. I was 33 when I came home. I spent a lot of that time in the land reform, expropriating large chunks of land that were owned by the rich and giving that to small farmers. I was in the co-op division, so I was helping those small farmers organize co-ops and try and figure out how to run them effectively. And a lot of that work was driven by international aid. We had lots of great international aid agencies, government agencies, sending us millions of dollars in well-intentioned funding, trying to alleviate poverty. And my experience was pretty discouraging. In my estimation, more often than not, the money that we were receiving and spending was not really helping farmers develop their own capacity to develop their communities sustainably. And in fact, in many cases, I feel like, frankly, we just made people more dependent on foreign aid. And in 1990, the Nicaraguan revolutionary government was voted out, and we were all left kind of ideologically orphaned, not knowing what to believe or do. And I very much by chance got a letter from a friend who told me about fair trade. And fair trade had, I mean, there were a couple of companies in the US that were talking about fair trade, but it was a rapidly growing movement in Europe at the time. And their slogan was trade, not aid. Trade, not aid. And their philosophy was, can we harness the power of the market to help poor people? Can we kind of reposition poor people in the global economy in a way that they are not victimized, but rather that they can take advantage of opportunities for growth and wealth creation? And I was living with coffee farmers way up in the northern region of Nicaragua, an area called Esteli. And, you know, our coffee farmers were getting 10 cents a pound for their coffee that year. That was the local market price being paid by the middlemen. Most of our farmers had, you know, on average 1 acre of land. They were growing about 2,000 pounds of coffee each. At 10 cents a pound, that meant, you know, maybe $200 in cash income for their whole harvest for the whole year. The typical small family farmer in Central America has, you know, a half an acre of corn, a half an acre of beans, a couple of mango trees in the front yard, a couple of avocado trees in the backyard, half a dozen chickens, and a pig for Christmas, right? I mean, it's a systems approach to survival, but coffee is the source, in many cases, the only source of cash for things that you can't grow on the farm, like barbed wire or rubber boots or kerosene for your lamp. $200 a year, that's not even $1 a day. That was the reality that I was living in the summer of 1990. And this crazy letter from a crazy friend saying, have you thought about fair trade, led me to start Nicaragua's very first fair trade coffee co-op that summer. I rode around on a motorbike for weeks and weeks, talking it up with people, hundreds of people that I had known for years. No one believed that they could export their own harvest. I've come to believe that so much of poverty is linked to identity, to self-perception. These farmers knew they were farmers. They were titans when it came to growing coffee. But tell them that they could export their own harvest and go toe-to-toe with international exporters, and they stopped cold. Most did not imagine themselves wearing that hat, or the hat of trucker, or the hat of banker, or any of those other roles needed to get a supply chain going. Save 24 families. 24 families signed up that summer. 24 families signed up, delivered on average about 10 sacks of coffee on consignment. I had no cash. I just had an idea. But they knew Pablito, and they delivered their coffee on a hope and a promise. And we hired out a processor, and we milled the coffee, and we filled a container, and we shipped it to actually a fair trade buyer right outside of Boston, Equal Exchange. Some of y'all may have heard of Equal Exchange. They're like the original OG fair trade coffee company in the US. And a couple of months later, they sent us back our check. They paid us $1.40 a pound for our coffee. $1.40 a pound when the local market was paying 10 cents. After costs, we had $1. We gave farmers $1 a pound. So instead of $200 for the year, they got $2,000 for the year. And I was a very popular guy that summer. Pablo $1, because we were getting $1 for each pound of coffee, and word spread like wildfire. The power of a positive example. We had, I don't know, 300 or 400 farmers the second year. We had 1,000 farmers sign up the third year. We had 3,000 farmers in our fourth year, which was my last year leading the co-op. So this became a movement, and not a revolutionary movement from above. It became a revolutionary movement from below, sparked by market access and the promise and potential of a different insertion in the global market. I was transformed. I went from being an anti-capitalist, like hardcore anti-capitalist, burn it down kind of guy, to holy shit, maybe we can ride this global market in a way that gives people their voice and allows them to put food on the table. You know, some people call us social entrepreneurs, social capitalists. I throw up in my mouth a little bit when I say that out loud, but you know, that's the reality. We're not trying to turn back the clock on globalization. At least I'm not in fair trade. You know, it's here. Those farmers are going to grow coffee one way or another. So the only question is, do they sell at 10 cents a pound to the middleman, or do they get organized, create economies of scale, go direct to the international market and get a much better price? And that's what we did. And oh, by the way, they're still there. 30 years later, Protocop is the name of our co-op, my former co-op, my first baby. You know, as a white dude in Nicaragua, one of my goals right off the bat was succession, and a Nicaraguan woman, as badass as they can come, took over when I left. She's still there today. They have, I think this year they're going to export 300 containers of coffee from those humble origins. Year one container. They are I think they're about a $40 million business. So, you know, it was transformative for me. It was transformative for those families, what they did with the money, the extra money. They ate 3 times a day. They dug wells in villages and brought clean drinking water to the community for the first time. We built schools. We created scholarship programs. School is free, but shoes and uniforms are required, and they're not free. So we created $200 a year scholarships for our kids to be able to buy the uniform, the books, and the shoes so they could stay in school past grade school. We ran health campaigns. We reforested hillsides that had been deforested. We created the country's first organic program. We created a women's empowerment program, which was based on microloans to any woman entrepreneur in the community that wanted to start her own business. We built soccer fields. We did all this cool stuff. And here's the punchline. None of it thanks to anyone's charity. None of it thanks to government intervention. It was all based on the ingenuity and entrepreneurship of these farmers, and on this simple idea of connecting more directly with the global market. So, yeah, things changed for me at that point, because fair trade was big in Europe and almost non-existent here in the US. I don't know why, but we really didn't have much of a fair trade movement here in the US. And so, you know, I had a existential crisis at that point. I mean, 11 years in Nicaragua, I'd married a Nicaraguan woman who was also very active politically. She didn't want to immigrate. Our son Emiliano had already been born. He was like 4. And I was really happy there and could have imagined doing what I was doing for a long time. But I really felt called to come back to the States at that point in 1994 and see if we could plant the fair trade seed here in the US. So that's what I did. I moved back in 94. I needed more tools. When I left Yale, I was so fed up with institutionalized learning. I swore I would never go to grad school, never go back to the university. But honestly, after 11 years in the field, I had so much stuff in my head that I needed to organize, and so much intention around taking fair trade forward, and therefore a lot of clarity around what a graduate program would give me. And in my case, I went for the MBA because I wanted the tools. I wanted to be a better business person, but with a social logic. I wanted to be a social entrepreneur. And so I went into an MBA program at Cal Berkeley with just a whole lot of clarity and intention around what I wanted out of that. And that made it a lot easier to suffer the bullshit of, you know, microeconomics with Professor Ben Hermelin. And I wrote the business plan for Fair Trade USA in my second year entrepreneurship class at Cal. Took me 2 years to raise the startup capital, and we launched in '98. It's a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit. And Fair Trade USA has basically a core mission of alleviating poverty and promoting environmental sustainability around the world through fair trade certification. And we think of our model as a shared value model. If you're familiar with Michael Porter's theory of shared value, the notion that fair trade is not about redistributing wealth from relatively wealthy consumers or relatively wealthy companies to poor people in the supply chain. It's not a redistributive model. It's not a fixed pie that we're just trying to reslice. It's a value creation model. We believe that fair trade and things like it can create new value that enables farmers and workers and their ecosystems to thrive, while companies continue to make profits and to get value in other ways. And I'll break that down in just a second. And while the third leg of the stool, the consumer, while we as consumers acquire value as well. And I'm going to break that down as well. So that's kind of, the theory of change is not to redistribute wealth. That would have been cool for the 20-something-year-old me, but I'm not into that now because that's not scalable. Like, I want to build something that capitalism wants. I want to build something that makes companies profitable because they're the engine of change for the farmers and workers in their supply chain. So I'm kind of unapologetically now trying to internalize the interests of enlightened companies and engineer the model in a way that serves them too. Obviously, I'm here for the farmer. I'm still Pablo. It's just that it's got to, for fair trade to work, it has to work for the companies in order to work for the farmers and workers. So what do? We do three things. We develop standards that define fair trade, and then we audit farms and factories against that standard. We certify those. When you see a fair trade label on a package of coffee or a banana or a t-shirt, you know that that farm or factory met the fair trade standard and then it was audited. You don't have to take the company's word for it that they paid farmers the right price. That claim is independently audited. Number one. Number two, we engage consumers because we have the power. If we buy the product, the model works. If we don't buy the product, the model doesn't work. There is no impact. It's that simple. So we lean in. We have a grassroots movement, fair trade towns, fair trade universities. We do a lot of online stuff. We want to do more. Number three, we run capacity building programs for farmers because early on, one of the things we discovered was that no matter how righteous brands and consumers felt about buying a fair trade product and helping a farmer, if the coffee tasted like shit, no one was going to buy it. Our farmers needed to produce quality. So we run training programs in product quality, in organizational capacity, so that the co-ops can, actually when they sign a contract, deliver on time. We have financial literacy programs. We do a lot of training around the fair trade model, a lot of it through partners, so not directly. We don't have a huge field staff. But we do work through NGOs and the co-ops themselves to engage farmers and to bring them on a journey of growing capacity. So that's what we do as an organization. And I'm just looking at the time. Oh, cool. Okay, so I'm going to try and finish this up in the next 5 minutes because I'm really curious to hear what your questions and thoughts are. Track record, 22 years in, can't fucking believe I'm still here. I thought I would do this for like 2 or 3 years and then go back to Nicaragua where I belong, porque siempre soy Pablo, but the reality is I got stuck. And the reason I got stuck is because I love it so much. It has been such a crazy journey of discovery because the fair trade model has evolved. We've evolved our approach in order to become more relevant, in order to go into new product categories, in order to serve new sectors. And so we started with coffee, grown by small farmer co-ops, primarily in Latin America. Fast forward to today, 22 years later, we work in 40 product categories. So we work with coffee and tea and chocolate and sugar and like 15 or 20 different fruits and vegetables. We certify fisheries. We certify apparel factories now, working with J. Crew and Athleta and Patagonia, of course, and Prana. We're certifying furniture factories now with West Elm and Pottery Barn and Target. Fair trade used to be only about small farmers in co-ops. We now work with small farmers that are unorganized, which is really hard. But organizing the unorganized is, that's been a lifelong quest of mine. So I'm really digging that part. We're working with farm workers now on big farms, and bringing better working conditions, safe worker safety and health, and better wages onto bigger farms and factories. We crossed the border 4 years ago. Fair trade historically has only been about the global South. So for most of our history, we were only working in Africa, Asia, and Latin America in 46 countries. Now we're working in 47 countries. We certify farms in the US. Because guess what, y'all? Labor conditions on farms here in the US suck too. So really excited about that. And that's been a learning journey in and of itself, because for the most part, farm owners in the US don't hire their labor. They hire labor brokers who hire labor. So it's a system that lends itself to trafficking and all kinds of bad labor practices. So peeling back multiple curtains to get at that and ensure that workers, many of whom are undocumented, are taken care of. That's been a trip and so much fun. And obviously we're working with great local unions and NGOs in that quest as well. So, and the newest thing, dairy. We're about to launch dairy with Chobani being our kind of lead or first partner in creating a standard for dairy farm workers in the US. So excited about that. So stay tuned. In January, you'll see our Fair Trade certified label on Chobani yogurt. So what else can I tell you? 62% consumer awareness of our label. That's pretty rad. 30% roughly of general population says they bought a Fair Trade certified product with our label on it in the last 30 days. So all of that leads to one of our key metrics of success. And by the way, we're working with 1,400 brands, from like small mom and pop brands, and mission driven brands like Equal Exchange to everyone. I mean, Costco, Safeway, Walmart, Stop and Shop, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. We work with all of them now, because that was really my vision from day one, to take this from kind of feel good lefty market niche to mainstream, right? Because my friends back in Nicaragua, the farmers, they don't care whether you're buying their coffee at Whole Foods or the local natural food store or Walmart. They just want a fair price so they can, take care of their kids. So we very quickly kind of leapt over that ideological issue of, we can only work with like companies that we like. We also work with companies that we have to kind of hold our nose around, and we don't make any claims about their overall corporate practices. So we're not B Corp. What we do is we provide an audit and an assurance that when you buy a product, no matter where you buy it, with our label on it, that stands for something. That stands for sustainable agriculture. That stands for better wages, and we audit that. So that, that's put us in the crosshairs of some of our comrades on the left who have thought, oh, what the fuck? Paul Rice sold out, by engaging with Walmart. And so, we can talk about bruising experiences on the journey of a social entrepreneur if y'all want to talk about that, but obviously that's one. But here we are. And what I want to finish by is talking about one of our key metrics of success, which is the amount of money over and above market price that we're able to generate for farmers and farm workers and factory workers around the world. So one of the definitive aspects of the Fair Trade Standard is we require that the brands up here buying that product pay a price premium back to the farmer or back to the worker. And that premium is pooled into a community development fund that is managed by the farmers or by the workers themselves. So it's all about empowerment, right? It's all about giving them the resources then to decide, well, what are we going to invest in our community this year? Is it water or is it education? And that whole journey and conversation at the grassroots level, honestly, was what excited me most about fair trade, because it's the journey of poor people finding their own voice and learning how to write their own history. So that sum of money becomes one of our key indicators of success every year. Last year, 2019, we generated $132 million in above market prices and premiums. So over and above what people normally would have made, $132 million off a $20 million budget. Our organization's budget last year was, round numbers, 20 million. So if you think about social return on investment, for every dollar that we invested last year in building the market and movement, we generated more than $6 in new wealth for farmers and workers around the world. And so that makes me proud. Heifer, Mercy Corps, Oxfam, all of our kindred spirits, no one has a social return on investment like that. No one has a machine. Every time you put a dollar in it, it creates $6 in wealth. So I'm proud about that, but I also feel a little embarrassed, quite honestly, that 20 years in, we haven't scaled this. I mean, there's a lot to be proud of. We work with over 1 million farmers and workers. We generated $130 million, but I mean, there are 2 billion people in the world living on $2 a day. If the goal is to fight poverty and make a dent, then we're just barely getting started. So that's what I think about all day, every day, is how do we scale the model? And obviously technology transformation is going to be at the heart of it. We're going into new products, so the landscape is shifting in our favor. Corporate America does want fair trade or things like it. They want the supply chain visibility. They want the transparency. They want to know that there's no child labor scandal waiting for them in the supply chain. But they also find in fair trade a way to tell the story and to engage us, the consumer. And so it's not just a kind of backward-looking supply chain sustainability model. It's also a consumer empowerment model. And so when I think about the impact on consumers, I think about, what do you and I get as consumers? What do we get when we buy a fair trade product or any sustainable or responsible product? What do we get? We live in the health and wellness space, so perhaps part of what we get is a healthier product. We know that the motivation for the health motivation is the #1 driver of organics. That's part of the value proposition. I think quality is there. There's kind of a natural link. If you pay the farmer a fair price, she's going to produce a higher quality cup of coffee for you than if she's struggling to put food on the table, right? So there is a correlation there, actual and promoted, that quality for you, the consumer, quality of life for her and her family. But I think there's more to it. I think, we're starting to look at the neuroscience of altruism and the psychographics, the research that's coming up that suggests that our species is kind of hardwired to be in community, that we need to feel purpose, we need to feel acceptance from our peers. I don't know. I have a millennial son and a Gen Z daughter, and in their circles, it's cool to be kind. Compassion is cool, and I'm fascinated by that. And I'm fascinated by the possibility that capitalism may be evolving, and conscious consumption may be evolving to a place where the emotional attribute that you and I get when we buy something that we know help the world, that emotional attribute will, rise, and that we'll be buying products not just based on, product features and price, but that the third driver will become ever more important, the emotional feeling that we get when we do something good. The feeling of gratification that we get when we buy a product and realize that we're reaching halfway across the world and helping a family keep their kids in school. On a day like today, when so many of us feel so disaffected with the political process, I can't help but feel hopeful that our movement and many other movements like it that are harnessing the market and harnessing products to do good, harnessing the goodwill of each and every one of us to make small efforts that make a big difference. I can't help but feel hopeful. I feel hopeful.
Well, thank you for that. And we really appreciate hearing about your journey and the founding of Fair Trade and sort of what's next. So anyone, if you have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand and unmute, and let's get a good dialogue going. While people sort of start thinking of questions, I can just start one off. So typically, obviously, with the fair trade products, there's more of a premium price, at least for coffee. So can you just talk about how to reconcile that? Maybe in the States, for example, only more affluent, middle upper class people can afford that fair trade product, and sort of what that journey's been like.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the early days of fair trade, that observation would have been accurate. I don't see that as much today. The fastest growing part of our coffee business, for example, is private label grocery coffee. So like Stop and Shop's own brand, or Trader Joe's or Costco's own brand, which is kind of a middle price point, but so it's not as cheap as Folgers, but it's not as expensive as Starbucks or Pete's, right? And so basically what companies are discovering is that they can pay more back to farmers and workers in the supply chain without having to pass that on to the consumer. And so I'm really encouraged by, what some have called the democratization of fair trade and things like it. I mean, we see the same thing in organics. 20 years ago, organics were a smaller portion of market share, and they were very expensive. Now organics, by virtue of much, much higher volume, the price of organic produce has come down and it's much more accessible. So I kind of see a similar path for fair trade.
Well, first of all, congratulations on everything you've done. It's really outstanding. Being from Colombia and coming from an agricultural family, I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I don't structure this question correctly, but maybe you can guide me. What's the difference to the farmer when they join a program like Fair Trade? Is it, they were making, I don't know, in Colombia, 800,000 pesos, the minimum wage, and now they're making 950,000 pesos, or are they now making 2 million pesos? And I'm speaking about our own currency here, but just to give you a percentage example, I'm curious to know that, and I have a lot of questions. So I'll just keep it to two for now. The other one is, why isn't fair trade a well-known thing in our Latin American countries? I mean, it's obviously very well known in the United States, but have you done any efforts to, allow these products to also be consumed within the country's boundaries? And of course, there's an arbitrage opportunity for the farmers. Obviously, I also export products from Colombia into the United States, but have you done anything, or is there any interest to also keep some of those fair trade products within the countries? I know the opportunities is not high monetarily versus the United States, but I'm just curious about that thought, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Enrique. In terms of how much gets back to the farmer, so about 75% of the farms that we certify today are small family farmers. And when I say small family farmers, that's in our world typically less than 3 hectares or 6 acres. So these are small farmers that typically depend on family or household labor. They don't really hire a lot of workers. And for them today, I mean, the premiums that we set are different from one product to the next. But just to give you an example, in coffee, market price for coffee is around $1.05 per pound. The fair trade minimum price and premium is $1.60. So those farmers are getting at least 55 cents more, and maybe even more based on quality premiums. You know, in this market, roughly a 30% greater. So we're not back in the old days when I got started where market price was 10 cents. It has come up. And especially for countries like Colombia, which produce very high quality. And, you know, thanks to Juan Valdez, Americans have this idea that, you know, Colombian coffee is amazing quality. So Colombia is somewhat better positioned than other countries, but suffice to say, there's a big return back to the farmer. These farmers are organized, however, and so the export price goes to the co-op. And the co-op is provided, which is owned by the farmers. The co-op provides services. It mills their product. It ships it to port. It provides technical assistance. Often the co-ops provide credit. So the fair trade price obviously is going to cover all those costs and deliver a higher final price back to the farmer. And that's what so many of our farmers say, that, you know, for them, fair trade isn't just about the money, it's about the enabling of their local grassroots organizations. They realize that standing alone as a 5-acre farmer, they're at the mercy of middlemen and money lenders and other market forces that are much more powerful. And so to create a context in which it's so much more profitable to band together with your neighbors. And by the way, you know, it's the same in the US. Sun-Kissed Oranges is a farmer-owned co-op. Ocean Spray Cranberries is a farmer-owned co-op. Diamond Almonds, you know, we have so many farmer-owned co-ops here in the United States too, dairy co-ops as well. A lot of people don't know that. So it's simple economics, right? It's how do you create economies of scale for poor people such that they can process, add value, and market their own product directly. So in terms of consumption in Colombia or in the global South, dude, it's part of my dream for the future. You know, fair trade was invented at a time when it was essentially conceived as a way for relatively wealthy consumers in the global North, in Europe and the United States principally, could help relatively disadvantaged producers in the global South, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So it was this very top-down model, which ignored the reality that we have exploitation of labor and destruction of ecosystems in the global North. So we kind of need fair trade standards here too. And then what you pointed at, which is there are tons and tons of consumers in Bogota, in Buenos Aires, in Mexico City, in Sao Paulo, in Delhi, in Ho Chi Minh City, in Manila. There are tons and tons of middle-class consumers around the world who are hip to sustainability and who, you know, according to some initial research that we've done, would be very, very engaged in a fair trade product, especially if it was grown in their own homeland, right? So you tap into kind of feelings of protectiveness and solidarity with your own citizens by buying, let's say, fair trade. You know, if you live in India and you know, we work with tea farms in Darjeeling and Assam and the other tea growing regions. What if we had fair trade Indian tea for Indian consumers? So that's an idea that has not happened yet, but we want to do it. It's a great idea. It's a no-brainer. We have to create that global network. Sharon sent a fun question about, you know, basically scale. And
can I just say something real fast?
Oh, of course. Go ahead, Sharon.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for talking with me. I am a fashion designer by trade. I'm actually working on a master's program in New York City, and trying to I'm working in trying to work in the apparel and textile recycling space, hoping that I can create a hub for that in New York City, with all of the key players to address textile waste, which is an enormous problem. 400 million pounds that New York City creates annually, just New York City. So it's an incredible problem, but I want to have the stream to, once we've established that, to have the market available here to take the pulp that we've created and recreate yarn and fabric. So introducing mill work to hopefully New York City, or maybe New York State, if that's more suitable, and or the tri-state, and then doing some local manufacturing. And here comes fair trade. The part that's most difficult in the cost of our clothing in general is labor. So how do we do that and scale it and bring more people to the table so that we're paying a fair wage for a labor force that can create that, both at a mill level and at a sewing factory level, and still be able to have it serve the greatest mass of people so that it's affordable. It's like we want to raise all the ships at once. How do you do that? How do we scale that, in your opinion?
You know,
You got 5 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I think about scalability all day, every day. It's really what I'm trying to figure out. And you know, there are a number of ways to scale things. One is through organic growth, where you just take what you do and you add more, right? So we certified 200 million pounds of coffee last year. That's 5% of the US coffee imports. You know, one way to think about scale is we're going to go from 5% to 10%, and from 10% to 20%. Right. Another way to think of scale is through replication. People copying what you do. And we've had a lot of copycats over the last 20 years who are coming in with either fairly traded or something like that.
Right.
And sometimes that's irritating and or infuriating, because often the copycats don't have quite the same high bar in terms of their standards. And so you're like, what the fuck? You know, you either do the, you know, hit the bar, or don't call yourself fairly traded, or don't, you know, don't be in this space. But actually that's stupid. It's all good. Replication is good. Copycats are good. Even if, you know, even if they're not, here's an example, Starbucks. You know, we certify maybe 5% of Starbucks total volume. They develop their own in-house code of conduct. They call it cafe practices. And 100% of their coffee is now under the cafe practices umbrella. It took them 15 years to get there. It was a model developed by Conservation International. It's heavier on environment than on quality of life. There's no premium. There's no extra money. You could say it's fair trade light. You could say it's, you know, fair washing. I mean, you know, depending on your point of view, you can either see that as a good thing or a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. I'm not happy that Starbucks is only doing 5% fair trade. I would love for that. I would love for them to go all the way. That would change the industry forever. But I have, at the end of the day, I have to celebrate that companies are doing more than nothing. Because Folgers, they're doing nothing. Maxwell House, they're doing nothing. Those two brands alone account for 40% still. A lot of old white dudes drinking that nasty shit. 40% of all coffee in America is Folgers or Maxwell House, and they have no sustainability programs. So I prefer Starbucks kind of halfway their program to, you know, business as usual. So when I think about replication, I'm starting to be a little bit more humble, or trying to be a little bit more humble about it, and realizing, okay, fair trade is like a stone in a pond. We're going to have ripple effects. They're not all going to be of equal strength as it, you know, as it expands. But ultimately, we're making progress. Ultimately, as a society, and we just take a step back from any particular model or certification or approach, to take a step back and take the long view, the last 10 years or the last 30, and then think about the next 10 years or the next 30, I think you have to conclude that, you know, in the arc of history, capitalism is making progress toward wedding purpose with profit, or finding a way for sustainability and profitability to not be at odds with each other, and in fact to be a driver. And I just want to add one more thing around scalability, which is scalability of anything embedded in the marketplace is about behavior.
Awesome. Yes.
Right. And so look at all the ads of companies that are connected to values. Like since the cops killed George Floyd, look at all the companies that have come out with statements around racial justice.
They have to.
Hang on. Let's set aside motive for a second. Let's see. Maybe. But here's the thing. 20 years ago, companies wouldn't have paid money for an ad that talked about their values. They would have sold us product features and price. And now they're selling us values. Now they feel like they need to connect with us on a deeper level. Now they know that we want to know, who are you, company? Patagonia, who are you? What do you stand for? Yeah, you got cool fleeces, but what do you stand for? And our voice, the voice of the conscious consumer that's asking, what do you stand for in society? That's going from a very small minority to now a significant minority. And the macro trend, if you believe the research around millennial and Gen Z mindset, the macro trend is that y'all will inherit the earth. This will be the new normal. It will be table stakes for companies to tell us what they stand for. And if they don't, we're going to pass. We're going to go buy something else. So I'm tactically frustrated and impatient, and strategically very confident about what's coming up in the next couple of decades around this. So when I think about scalability, it's about behavior. It's about us right now and in the future, with our peers, with our kids, with our families, sharing a message that every purchase matters. I mean, every vote matters.
Yeah, thank you so much for both your presentation and those thoughts on kind of consumer power in a way. And I think you made very clear how fair trade works within kind of the capitalist market-based system. I wonder, have you done any studies or know about impacts on kind of the communities outside of the market? For example, if farmers are earning a lot more money, is everyone just growing coffee now and not growing subsistence crops anymore, for example? Kind of what is the impact on the grower communities?
That's a cool question. And, you know, if you'd like to do that research project, hit me up after this webinar. You know, I've spent a lot of years in the field, and my observation, empirically, my observation is that fair trade farmers, when they get more money for their coffee or their tea or their cacao or whatever it is they're growing, they don't plow under their food crops to plant more coffee. It's like small farmers know that crop diversification is the key to surviving good years and bad in any one crop. And so what's more often, I was actually looking at some data last week, and we have literally hundreds of co-ops that have taken fair trade premiums from coffee or some other cash crop and invested it in on-farm grain storage. How cool is that, right? So they're growing their own corn and beans, but the problem is they're trying to save it for the whole year, and you've got weevils, you've got mice. So on-farm grain storage means that you can effectively store the food crops that you're growing so that you can eat all year long and not have to sell that grain to the market when market price is low, and then buy grain back from the market when market price is high. So it's just a potent little example of how fair trade leads to food security, which is not something you would necessarily think of. Oh, fair trade's about coffee. Well, what about food, right? So we need to do that research in order to not only make a credible case for the link between fair trade and food security, or just better income and food security, but also in order to maybe dial up some of our farmer engagement and capacity building programs. Because I was thinking, you know, this grain storage program that I was reading about is in Honduras, And I was thinking, well, what about in other countries? And could there be, you know, kind of a horizontal peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer training program that we could get going to share lessons around things like that? So anyway, you know, this teases up something that I don't know if y'all have any interest, but we need research help, y'all. How to do another
Well, if
meeting. Bye,
anyone's
Ryan. Thank
interested
you.
in research help, feel free to contact me and I can pass along to Paul.
Okay,
if
that's
there's
awesome.
interest
That's
on this group here.
awesome.
Maybe I
Thanks.
have time for one last quick question that was put in the chat earlier. So what is the process for adding certification standards for new products? Typically in the government process, there's like a notice and comment period or NGO input. So if you could just elaborate on what's happening with some of your new certification standards.
We are part of an umbrella, a global umbrella organization called ISEAL, ISEAL, together with Rainforest Alliance and Forest Stewardship Council and Marine Stewardship Council and the organic certifiers. We all adhere to kind of the same methodology for developing standards. So it kind of answers the question, you know, who's looking over the shoulder of the different certifications and making sure that they're legit. And, you know, the quick version is research into the particular field. So in this case, dairy, we're working on dairy, research into conditions in the dairy industry, both from a labor as well as an environmental perspective, development of a draft standard, getting stakeholder input into the draft standard. And when I say stakeholders, literally everyone that's touched by it, from farm worker groups, activists, unions, owners, brands and retailers, academia. And then there's a draft for public comment. And then usually there's a 2-year pilot to see how much it works and see how it works with then a refinement along the way. So it's very much a journey of input and iteration to try and constantly improve on something. No standard is fail proof. But I really like our approach, which is the standards have to evolve. They have to be in a process of continuous improvement.
What a pleasure it was to have you here and talk with us about your journey and fair trade, and then some insights on what's currently happening in the world and sort of your hopeful outlook on the grassroots movement there. So we really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the chance to chat, and feel free to reach out to me after this if you want to continue the conversation.